Today we're heading to California, where you could just be arrested if a cop sees you pull out a Capri Sun, because apparently plastic straws are dangerous. Not to mention, making over $100,000 a year there is considered doing badly. So despite California already being a scary place, prepare yourself for these 10 allegedly true scary stories from the Golden State. If you want to be in a future video, I'm looking for creepy confessions from teachers and Ravenmocker sightings. Send them over to me at darknessprevails.org. Number 1. Scary Subway Stalker by Katherine V. It happened a few months ago. I'm 14. A group and I had traveled to California for a dance competition, and since it lasted the whole weekend, we ended up finding restaurants every night to go eat dinner at. We had planned to go to this Italian restaurant, but due to messing up our reservation, we ended up at a Subway instead. As we walked over to the Subway from the Italian restaurant, I noticed quite a few homeless people and beggars along the sidewalks. I dismissed it, as we were in a more populated area. I was walking next to my friend when I suddenly saw her frown. So I glanced in the direction she was looking, and I saw a woman. She was clearly homeless with short blonde scrappy hair and tattered clothing. "Hello there," she said in a slight whisper. "Come over here." I heard it and started to walk faster, but before I could get completely away, we made direct eye contact. The two things that really creeped me out the most were her teeth and her height. She had at most 6 teeth left, and they were all rotting out. I shivered just looking at her. Even though she was sitting down, I could notice how tall she was. Even hunched over, she was basically Amazonian in height, but I couldn't imagine her standing up. Didn't want her to stand up. We made it to the Subway restaurant and took a seat inside. It was only our group that night with our mothers. It's important to note that the way it was laid out, people outside could see most if not all of the inside, because the walls were mostly just glass windows, and everything was lit up. I ordered my sandwich and went to get a drink from the fountain. As I was pouring my iced tea, I heard the bell from the door ring, and everyone went silent. I put a lid on my drink and turned to see what was going on, but something blocked my way. I basically ran into her. Standing no more than 2 inches from me was the creepy homeless woman. I almost screamed. I had to swallow it down. I saw her reach for her back pocket, and that's when I ran past her. "Is this your family?" she asked in a low, raspy voice. "What's your name? How old are you?" She followed me around the restaurant, and right before she started to corner me, the manager came out and yelled at her to leave, and I've never seen anyone run so fast. Wiping tears from my eyes, I sat down with my group and tried to laugh it off. But as I was facing the window, I noticed something in the darkness. A man was walking past the store, and not just once, but 10 times or so over. I was getting nervous, especially because what had just happened, but I shrugged it off. He didn't look homeless like she did. But then he walked inside the restaurant, stumbling about, slurring words. He had definitely been drinking. As he stumbles in, our chaperones start to pick up their bags and get ready to leave. I do so as well, and as I start to stand up, he says to my group, "What a lovely family. You'll make a nice family, yes? You," he pointed at me, "you made my wife sad." I ignore him and get closer to my group. We quickly make our exit, but we have to walk by him first, and as we do, he manages to stroke my hair, saying, "Oh, beautiful." We all ran out of the store as fast as possible, and basically ran out of that area to get far away. I know it sounds bad, but these days I stay wary of areas with homeless folks, and I even feel a tinge of fear whenever I see a subway. It's not their fault that one of my scariest experiences happened there. Number 2. Next Time, Just Drive by Evie Eldritch. I worked in a certain large city in California and lived in a smaller town about an hour away, which prompted many of my friends to question my sanity at the prospect of commuting 2 hours every day round trip. Better yet, being 21 years old, there wasn't a shortage of jobs closer to home, but I was never bothered by it. The pay was good, and it was for a cause that was very important to me. There was a public transit system that conveniently went from a station a few miles from my house to one about a block away from my work, which I happily took over driving through dense, hostile traffic and the nightmare known as parking your car in the city. Additionally, the rides provided a lovely opportunity for me to catch up on reading and discover new music. So, on a night like any other, I was on my way home via the transit system. I had selected the least stained corner seat I could find in an otherwise nearly empty train car. Then I took out my book and a glass bottle of Coke to prepare for some well-earned relaxation. I stared off into space for some time before a man walked into the train car. I remember he was wearing a green denim jacket and baggy tan cargo shorts. He also sported steel-toe work boots that vibrated the hollow floor of the train as he walked. His hair was spiked in a peculiar way. It didn't so much look like he had gelled it, as much as it seemed he had styled it by standing in a wind tunnel. Overall, he looked a bit scraggly, but far from homeless or too off-putting. After surveying the numerous empty seats available, he came over to where I was sitting and asked if he could sit next to me. I'd only been working at that job for a month, and being the naively trusting girl from an upper-middle-class town that I was, I had not developed my street smarts enough yet. Foolishly, I said yes. He sat down as I returned to my book, but I could feel his eyes on me, and I tried not to notice. "What are you reading?" he asked, craning his neck to look over at my pages. I briefly described the book to him before pointedly clearing my throat and returning to the story. In the periphery of my vision, I saw him smiling, and then he said, "You're pretty hot, you know?" This put me a bit on edge, but it wasn't the first time a stranger had flirted with me so directly or during a commute. Some people just can't grasp the fact that women don't go on public transit just so random guys would hit on them. I rolled my eyes internally and gave him a generic, thank you. "Sorry," I said. "I'm not really up for talking. I'm really wrapped up in this book right now." But what the man said next chilled me to my core. "Why don't you come home with me? I can wrap you up in something else." Only then did I realize how uncomfortable this situation really was. The train car still barely had anyone else in it, and I had stupidly picked a seat on the innermost column, making it impossible to get out of my row without either sliding past the creep or vaulting over the seat in front of me. I didn't want to make a scene out of fear of exacerbating him. I'd played myself. I glanced over at the man, made brief eye contact with him, and that's when I noticed his eyes were massive, bloodshot, and were staring right through me. His stare alone violated me to my bones. Clearly, this man had to have been on something. Despite my seating predicament, this should have been the time where I got off on the next station, stayed in a crowded area for a moment, and waited for the next train home. Unfortunately, I didn't think of this at the time, and instead, I tried to keep my cool and played it off casually. "It's just that," I sighed, "my shift today wore me out. I'm just gonna go home and get some sleep." But the surprises never ended with this guy, as he produced a burnt vial full of white powder from his sleeve. Crystal, I'd never seen it in real life before, but I knew it at a glance. "This'll wake you right up," he claimed, shaking it lightly. Or perhaps his hands were trembling. "Now, you want to come home with me? Make some money? Or am I gonna have to drag you out of here?" I felt my face almost seize up in shock, but I stopped myself. I would not allow him the satisfaction of having rattled me. I calmly and politely declined, which he returned by going at great lengths to describe what he wanted to do with me. Again, I should have gotten off the train early, but I was an innocent little cinnamon roll who had only ever heard stories about this sort of thing happening. I had no idea what to do. When the train finally pulled up to my stop, I put my book back in my purse and grabbed the bottle of Coke. "This is me," I said hastily, standing and leaping over the seat in front of me. After all of this, the last thing I wanted was to turn my back to this creep. I was horrified when he stood as well and said, "What do you know? This is my stop too." Without another word, I speed walked to the front of the station, but I could hear him keeping pace with me as his heavy boots clinked against the tile floor. I exited the turnstile and began to go at a brisk jog, morbidly curious to find out if he would continue to keep up. Unsurprisingly, he did. He wasn't going to stop until he had me, and that's when something snapped in me. That's when I did what I should have done to begin with. I caused a scene. I out-crazied him. I took the glass bottle of Coke by the neck and swung it against a nearby wall, shattering it and creating a makeshift weapon. I began to scream, threatening him, calling him names, like the trash he was. That was plenty enough to catch the attention of everyone in the station. The man was taken aback, shocked by the sudden outburst from the woman he previously perceived as submissive. I went on, screaming, "Everyone in the station, may I have your attention, please?" I continued to shout, holding the broken bottle in his direction. I then proclaimed to everyone now listening that this man tried to sell me things and offered to buy my body when I refused. Then I described how he stalked me out of the train station, and then I requested someone to call the police. The creep was aghast. He took a moment to process what had happened before making a break for it. I considered chasing him, but figured it would only lead to more danger. Besides, even if that wasn't the case, I quickly discovered that my legs had turned to jelly. I shakily took a seat and cried until the police came. They took my statement, but as far as I know, they never caught the guy. This wasn't the last time I was harassed on my commute, but I had to learn my street smarts pretty quickly that night, and as a result, I never allowed it to escalate that far again. Guys and girls, take my advice. If someone is making you feel threatened in a public setting, scream your lungs out and take a stand. Number 3. I Saw a Skinwalker in the Desert by Druid. I'm 18. A group of friends and I were going on a trip to Harry Potter World at Universal Studios in LA. It was early July of 2018. Exciting as it was, nothing bad happened until on our way back. We came back the night of the second day, as it was only a 2-day trip. And we drove there so we'd have to drive back. Now, my family and I have lived in the desert for all my life. I'm quite accustomed to wildlife pretty well. This is where my encounter begins. My best friend's mom was in the passenger seat of the car, and my other friend's mom was driving. Given it was around 9 o'clock at night, and we were all exhausted, everyone but me and the moms were asleep. I had suddenly woke up and couldn't fall back to sleep. I was watching the storm outside with bright flashes of lightning and rain. We were in the middle of the desert, and all I knew was that we were still in California. That's when I noticed a car parked along the side of the road. Clearly, it was broken down. The person who probably owned the vehicle was checking their trunk for something. The desert nearby was lit up and a whitish glow due to the rain being reflected off the passing car lights that shone onto the outskirts of the desert. That was when I saw it. It looked like a person crouched down, trying to hide themselves. They weren't very large in size, but I could see that they were crouching down onto 2 feet, 2 legs, and so any thought of it being an animal was quickly replaced in my mind. But then I noticed something that confused me. If it was a person, then there was no way the antlers on its head made any sense. Yes, I saw antlers on its head. As we passed by, I noticed that it was crouched down, staring at the person, putting things or messing with things in his trunk. And he was none the wiser. He had no idea he was being watched. For a brief moment, when we were passing it, the thing turned its head and looked at us in our car. I remember the chills I felt when I saw it look our way. I remember shivering. I knew then that it wasn't simply light playing tricks on my eyes. I know what I saw. I know it wasn't simply a deer, and I know it wasn't just a person either. It was something in between, something I don't want to see again. Number 4. UFO Sightings by Northern Light Star. My story starts in a town called Chico in Northern California. My wife and I decided to go to a park that's down the road from our place on a clear night in 2016. We soon arrived at the park, where there were a few soccer games going on at the playing fields. We went to an area a little hidden away from places people were at, because we had snuck out some adult beverages. As we were stargazing, I noticed something moving in the sky. It was obviously closer to the Earth than satellites are, and it was moving at a fast, steady pace across the sky. After a while, it seemed to disappear. Nothing too creepy, just a little strange, and could be easily written off as a meteor or something like that. Fast forward half a year or so, and we have a more intense sighting. It was about 2 a.m., and I needed to get cigarettes and some snacks while we were at it. I'm driving and my wife is in the passenger seat as we leave the apartments and turn on the main road. Immediately, I look up in the sky and see a very bright object in the sky and notice something is odd about it. It's a neon blue color, and it's making some weird movements. At first, I thought it was a star or meteor, but then its behavior was just impossible to explain physically. Plus, it was about 20 times brighter and bigger than other stars in the sky, and no known man-made vehicle can change its trajectory at a whim like that. "Do you see that?" I said while pointing it out to my wife. "That's definitely not normal." The object then quickly moved, what had to be miles downward, but at a slight curve. Then it immediately stops and bounces a little higher back upwards, again with a slight curve. Then it stops again and goes to the side. My wife is freaking out. "Why does it look like it's following us?" I remember hearing her whisper, "Oh my God." She's legitimately scared, but I'm amazed. It was glowing brighter. Maybe it was getting closer to us. We drove under some trees that blocked our sight of the thing, and after getting in the clear again, we saw that the object was gone. But it was still hard to comprehend that something like that was real, that the UFOs people talk about are actually tangible things. I'm not sure what it actually was, man-made, alien-made, or some strange physical phenomenon. No matter what it really was, it still scared the living daylights out of us. Number 5. My Terrible Neighbor by Nick J. My dad grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. Growing up, he had a neighbor that lived behind him that he and his brother always found strange. His name was Stephen Carlson, and they called him Creepy Carl. My dad and his brother used to like to adventure and explore the fields and drainage tunnels in their neighborhood. It was something they did for fun, especially when they were bored. One day, my dad's older brother came to him and told him that his friend had found a girl's body in a nearby tunnel. Sure enough, it was true. Her name was Tina Fails. My dad's brother was soon interviewed on the news, and his friend was used as a witness. 40 years later, my dad came to me and told me that they found the person who took Tina Fails' life. I knew about the story of the body because he had told me when I was younger, but when he found out who it was, he remembers that his jaw dropped. It was Creepy Carl, the creepy neighbor that lived behind my dad. My dad's neighbor turned out to be a psychopath. Number 6. Summer Break Creeper by Traveling Demon Girl. I'm 20 years old and I live in California. This story took place during my junior year of high school, and I was 17 years old at the time. After school one day, I was on Facebook doing what anyone would do, checking posts, commenting, and updating my status. All of a sudden, I got a message. I assumed it was someone I knew, and they simply wanted to have a conversation, so I opened it to see who it was. Of course, I quickly saw that it was no one that I knew in person. The individual who messaged me was a man named Umar, and he sent a message saying simply hi. I wasn't sure why he messaged me, so I checked out his account to see who he was. His account said he was from Pakistan, and a few other basic things. I didn't think too much of it. In one of his pictures, he looked to be maybe in his late 20s or early 30s. After I messaged him, asking him who he was, he said that I looked cute. I thought it was a bit creepy that he said it so soon, but I had to remember that most people can see your pictures or posts and other stuff on Facebook. So I simply replied, "Thank you." Now, this is where it gets creepy. A few hours later, I get another message from him asking me how old I was. I was cringing at that point. I didn't know if this guy was a pervert or just didn't understand boundaries. I simply didn't reply. But then the following message said, "Will you marry me?" I was shocked. I wasn't sure he'd go further with it. I had no idea who he was, and I quickly typed no. I should have just blocked him. But then he asked how my day was, and I guess his return to normalcy put me back in an okay mood. Soon, he got upset with me, bringing back up the fact that I said no to him. He said he was going to end his own life, said that I was simply a test to see if anyone even cared about him. I told him not to do that. Told him that I barely knew him, and I was not something to base any major decision on. He was just a random guy who got in touch with me off Facebook. Never heard of him before. Why did he make me so important? I ended up telling him that he needed to seek psychiatric help, but then I never got a response. Not for days. Instead, I heard from his brother, who apparently just wanted me to know that he was in the hospital. He had been upset that I rejected him, that he had been depressed for a while. But I was more angry than anything. How dare you blame and use a stranger for your bad decision and sadness? This is not how the world works. I blocked his brother's account and his account, and I never wanted to hear from them again. Like, my God, look at the crap you can get yourself into just by replying to a stranger. Obviously, if you're on social media, only chat with people you know. Otherwise, they might make you responsible for something terrible they do. 7. The Creep by Juju. It was 8 years ago. I was quite young. My best friend and I were walking home one day in a small town in California. We soon saw that a black van with heavily tinted windows was following us. We tried to avoid the van and started to walk faster. The van pulled up next to us, and its window began to roll down slowly. A man whose head was almost touching the top of the roof of the van peeked out. He had a large beard with sunglasses and an old ripped-up t-shirt with an American flag on it. He asked us if we needed a ride home, but I quickly shook my head. The van then drove away. Little did I know that we would see him again. A few days passed by. I never told my father about the strange van. It never got to that point where I thought I needed to tell someone. One day I was walking down the road once more. I was with another friend of mine. He was maybe 7 years old. I saw the same black van from before, making me pause for a moment. I grew uncomfortable, especially when the van drove up and the man appeared through the window again. Before he said anything, I asked him who he was. He replied, "You can call me Bryce," he said in a deep, dark voice. And that's when the worst possible thing happened. My vision went black and blurry as something was put over my head. I was picked up, and soon I felt myself being tied up. When the mask was removed, I realized I was now in the back of that van. I started panicking, trying to kick and scream, but I couldn't do much more. Suddenly, a man with a deep voice, a different man this time, asked me, "Are you the one they call Carlos?" I calmly nodded my head, too afraid not to cooperate. It was quiet for a few moments until one of them cursed, and then I heard the sirens. The van picked up speed as the guy driving floored it. Then there was a loud popping sound. Then the van slid to a rough halt. I would later come to realize that we had run into a spike trap. Soon, police officers were pulling the men out of the car and grabbing us, taking us to safety. Luckily for us, there were cameras in the area, and the men were already at large for an attempted kidnapping. I was fine, and the other kid was fine too, luckily. Though this is an experience, a scar, that will never go away. Personally, I have trouble walking on the sidewalk, whether I'm alone or not, and prefer to ride and drive anywhere I go. Number 8. California Road Rage by Anonymous. A couple of weeks ago, something happened to me. Now, I live in California where driving is almost always aggressive, and it makes me wonder if some of the other drivers are just angry or on some kind of substance. I was driving recently on the highway when someone cut me off and I nearly slammed into the guardrails. I honked, gave him the middle finger. Yeah, I know I shouldn't have done that, but living in California, you quickly grow exhausted from the stupidity of other drivers. Also, it is not uncommon for people in California to brake check you, flip you off, honk their horn, and follow you at night, flashing their lights, or even try to yell at you through their window. That's the driving culture here in California. Anyway, after I flipped him off, he then moved to the lane on my left and stared at me. I soon exited the freeway as my exit was coming up, but the guy followed me off the freeway. There was a ramp leading down to a stoplight before turning onto the street. I came to it as it turned red, and I had to stop. I was in the right lane, ready to turn right, and I noticed the guy had followed me off the freeway and had kept tailgating me. I switched lanes, not wanting him behind me. When the light turned red, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that he was getting out of his car and was on foot charging towards mine. I freaked out, as I didn't have any form of protection on me. Just as he was running over to my car, there was a car in front of me, and I could not turn right. That's when I noticed he was holding something in his hand. Before he reached me, the light turned green and the car in front took off. I sped off so fast before he could get to my car. He then ran back to his and jumped in. I was afraid he'd follow me again, and this time I wouldn't lose him. I was about to look for the nearest police station using my GPS as I've heard that if you're ever followed like this, you should just drive straight to the cops. I kept driving and soon realized that I could no longer see him. I have no idea what he was planning on doing to me, what he actually had in his hand, but he definitely looked angry and ready to start a fight, or end one. If that stoplight hadn't turned at the right time, I'd hate to think what would have happened to me. Now, I plan on getting some sort of protection, even if it's just a can of bear mace to protect me and to keep on me at all times, because people, they're unpredictable. Number 9. Psycho Homeless at the Improv by Harris. This event happened last summer. The event occurred during the 3rd or 4th day of a week-long field trip. The camps are in Massachusetts, but we were in California for the trip. Now, enough background. My friends and I were at a theater, awaiting to watch some form of improv. Side note, I normally hate improv, but I was talked into seeing this one. Anyway, we were waiting inside for our sister camp to show up. 10 minutes into waiting, a sudden loud noise caught everyone's attention, and we all looked toward the entrance. 4 kids, me being one of them, and 2 counselors approached the thankfully locked doors, and what we saw will be burned into my memory. A tall, slender, nearly skeletal, balding, dirty man was banging his fist on the door with obviously all his strength. He was yelling in a raspy voice, "Let me in." My friends and I began to back up and tried to hide. I know, right? A cluster of 16-year-olds scared of one man. But from the look and size of him, I wasn't sure if the door would even hold. Then one of my friends who had just left the bathroom heard the man yelling and did the most stupid thing ever. He walked toward the door and began to try to open it, but we all pulled him back before he did it. I don't know if he thought it was funny or what, but it was definitely stupid. We could hear the lock on the door breaking. The psycho man eventually would have his way inside, but thankfully, the police showed up, and although it took several different cops to take him down, they eventually did. After the scene was over, and several minutes of trying to recoup, we ended up enjoying the improv show, then hastily enjoyed the rest of our trip in California, as we were anxious to get out of there. And number 10, The Stranger by Mariam E. This takes place when I was a little girl in 2nd grade. I grew up in a fairly upper middle class neighborhood in Southern California. The threats of weirdos and criminals was nearly non-existent for me. Everyone there was sheltered, and to be honest, we kids thought everyone was nice, and there were only bad guys in movies. Anyway, both my parents worked, so each day I had to stay at an after-school program called Kids Care, where basically they keep an eye on you until your parents come to pick you up. I usually was picked up at around 6 p.m. Until then, my friends and I would play soccer. The field is set up as a giant rectangle, but the right side of the edge of the field is a short slope with lots of greenery, and on top there's a line of houses overlooking the field and the school in general. Every day, me and about 10 other people or so would go out into the field, where we were supposed to be monitored by an adult. But since all of these so-called monitors and teachers were all in the main building, no one was watching us at the time, even though they were supposed to be. The sun was setting early then, thanks to daylight savings, and on that particular day, it was 5 o'clock when this happened. We were out in the field, no teachers or monitors around us. We started playing soccer as usual, until my best friend got hurt. We ran to get a Band-Aid or 2 from the classroom that was halfway across the school. I, however, decided to stay with my friend, and I sat down beside her. Around that time, I got an eerie feeling as if we weren't alone in the middle of an empty field, and by then, the sun was just a thin line on the horizon. I've always been a paranoid person, and the whole time they were gone, I kept looking behind my back, doing 360s, because I could feel that nasty feeling in my stomach grow. When they finally came back, we went back to playing soccer as usual, and the feeling still wasn't gone. My friend was running towards the goal, and we were cheering her on until she stopped midway, and her expression grew blank. She was staring at the top of the small slope on the right. I thought she had seen a dog or something like it, so I looked over, but I hadn't seen anything yet. I stood up and asked her, "What's going on?" She whispered to the point where I could barely hear it. She said, "There's a man watching us from the bushes." I spun around, and there really was a man there. He was probably in his 40s, and he was wearing a red shirt with a big beard, holding a big camera, smiling and watching us from a freaking bush. What the heck? I nearly screamed. We saw the flash from the camera go off. He suddenly jumped up and ran in the direction of the houses. The last thing I saw him do was jump the fence to someone's backyard. By now, we were all screaming like banshees as we frantically looked around for a teacher. But nope, no teacher around. We continued screaming as we ran into the main building. When we got there, all the creatures were already out of the classrooms trying to find the source of the noise. My friend and I were the most shaken, and we soon figured out that none of the other kids saw the man, and they were just freaked out that we were freaked out. It wasn't until recently I realized that this man was obviously planning to do something disgusting with those photos. The police were called immediately, and the best part? We got pulled out of that kids' care place, and we got to talk to the police, which was much cooler than simply sitting there and waiting for your parents. I've never been to California, and despite it being the go-to place for most YouTubers, I think I'll be staying away. Wildfires, plastic straw bans, and other unorthodox laws don't sound very interesting or fun. Then again, if I can experience a creep or two, I think I'd love to check it out. And California appears to have plenty of creeps. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your scary stories at darknessprevails.org. If you want to support my channel further, you can donate $1 a month or more at patreon.com/darknessprevails and get your name in the credits at the end of the videos. Or download my free app, Spooked, on the Google Play Store. If you're looking to part with that hefty cash, you can click the shop button below, or go to morbidmonsters.com and get some Darkness Prevails merchandise. As always, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 10 mysterious creatures sighted in Texas. Henry Strohmeyer says, "Please make more lockdown stories." I'd be happy to. But then the federal YouTube department comments back, "Why would you want that? That means more lockdowns have to happen, and that means more insane people." Here's the thing though, federal YouTube department. Reading stories about things that happen doesn't mean they're going to happen more often, and it doesn't make them happen. Keep that in mind. John Lesky says, "You're the GOAT, bro." Thank you. Yeah, thanks, John. Dragon Slayer 2016 says, "What's your favorite horror film?" John Carpenter's The Thing, all the way, followed by Alien. June Coleman says, "Yeah, Darkness, you're on fire." About time. Life is pain after all. Set me ablaze. And Zach Conchshell says, "Could you do monster stories from New England?" Oh heck yeah, that'd be great. Let me just write that down. Anyways guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails episode. More scary stories are coming soon. Until the next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate, cause they're just awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.